Welcome back to the show, folks. This is the Upper Tier podcast. I am your host, Niall Hogan. If you could go out to YouTube to the Upper Tier, smash that subscribe and bell notification button, drop a like on the video as you could, as we bring you more pro wrestling content. Tonight, we're going to continue our series of reviews on Dark Side of the Ring. This is a series I started way back in the Four Podmen days, but we find ourselves in season 4. Last week, of course, we reviewed Chris Candido and Tammy, of course. Such a kind of tragic episode and stuff like that. So if you haven't checked it out as well, we're checking out to get our thoughts on it. But this week is an interesting one. It's kind of a personal one for me as well. This brings me back to a time when I was quite young as a kid, 12, 13 I was. Wrestling was big on my agenda. I was a big fan of pro wrestling. And I used to watch WWF on the old originals, kind of Sky Sports, if you like. But I used to follow NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions and the Von Erichs in Texas and all on a channel, I think, called Screen Sport back in the day that came on the old cable link TV. And they used to show these at late at night, probably around 10 o'clock, half 10. My dad used to record them on videotapes for me and all. And I used to catch the repeats during the day and stuff like that and all. So it was a real time for me in terms of wrestling. And I think sometimes you've heard me describe that back then I used to get my pro wrestling sports entertainment back then, if you like. If you wanted to watch a show, you watch WWF, WWE. But if you wanted to get that real gritty wrestling feel, you always watch the stuff from the territory. So Jim Crockett Promotions, which later became WCW as it amalgamated and Turner bought it over. But that's what I used to watch, So that's where I used to. It was kind of very gritty. It was in kind of smoky kind of arenas, and it was like, I suppose that's why my love for wrestling these days takes me to sort of like warehouses and gym halls and scouts dens and all this kind of stuff, and that's where I kind of community centers and stuff like that. That's kind of why I love that end of the wrestling as well as going to the big stages like WrestleMania and stuff like that as well. But this one's quite a personal one. This is episode 2 of season 4 of Dark Side of the Ring. This is Shattered, the Magnum TA story. I've had the absolute privilege, I must say, and I tip my hat to Ian Kelly on this one, on Dynamo's doesn't. He got Magnum TA on as a guest. He knows how big a Magnum TA fan I was, and going back to that time in Crockett Promotions with Dusty and Akita and the Road Warriors and the Horsemen and the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette and all that kind of stuff. So he got me on the podcast with him, and we were chatting away, and it was great to hear him talk about his time with Nikita Koloff and all. Check it out. It's on Dynamo's doesn't it? It was a great episode. About 10 minutes in, we had a power cut here in the house. And I came back on about 5 minutes later, and I got back on the episode. And I was just thinking, this is a guy I followed throughout the 80s. Was a big part of my wrestling fandom, if you like. And of all the times to get a power cut in the area was when I was on a podcast with Magnum TA. But I got back on the podcast anyway, joined in the chat, and we had a great conversation about it and stuff like that. But this is kind of an unusual episode because although there's certain elements of it that are quite sad and stuff like that, on reflection, it could have been a hell of a lot worse. And I think Magnum alludes to that in the episode. We'll get into talking about the accident and all. I'm sure most people kind of know the background story. But Magnum has gone on to live his life. He's Terry. He's very successful. Runs a construction company involved in communication towers and all that kind of stuff. He's also heavily involved in the wrestling convention scene and stuff like that, and has teamed up with a lot of legends to bring memorabilia, merchandise, and all that kind of stuff. So it's great to see him. Last time we spoke to him, he was so upbeat about all this stuff. This was plans he was working on. I'm not sure even if it was last year we were talking to him. It might have been the year before. It might have been during COVID or something like that, and he was getting ready to launch all that stuff. But this is the Magnum TA story. And of course, it begins with, of course, how he got into the business and stuff like that. And like so many wrestlers back then, he was doing bouncer in a bar. He was a big dude. He was put together, good looking guy. In the 80s, had that kind of permed kind of mullet kind of hairstyle that a lot of them had. At that course, the legendary mustache that so many wrestlers in the game had then, that was so synonymous and stuff like that. But he was wrestling in this bar, and he obviously had quite a unique look, and Buzz Sawyer recognized that and invited him to come wrestling, but he'd have to pay wrestling license. And Jim Cornette alludes to it on that those licenses cost about 15-20 bucks or whatever it was. And Buzz Sawyer told him it was 10,000. So Magnum went home and he told his parents, I think it was, and they got the money up anyway for him to pay the money. And of course, the money was handed over to Buzz Sawyer, and Buzz Sawyer headed off with his money. Just big up to Eno. Eno's there in the comments. How are you, Ian? Hope you're enjoying this one. This will be a good one. I'm not sure if you caught the episode, but it was a great episode. But yeah, it was a very, very interesting one insofar as Magnum then came into the fold and literally got nothing for his 10 grand. Not even sure if he ended up getting the license or if he had to go and buy one properly in the end. And the lads kind of tracked down Buzz Sawyer and told Magnum where he was, and Magnum rocked up to his house, knocked on the door. How are you, Buzz? What's the story with the 10 grand? And Buzz Sawyer proceeded to bring him down to the ring and teach him some stuff. And I think Magnum alludes to it being a 2-hour period, the most expensive 2 hours in his life, I'd say. But then he went in and he started wrestling, shared a locker room across with the great Andre the Giant, of course, who came up with Magnum's name, Magnum TA. Terry Allen, and the name came up basically was obviously from the tash, and of course the size of Magnum. Of course, he was a big guy, but at the time there was a show on TV with Tom Selleck called Magnum PA, and it was really, 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 really popular. Tom Selleck was a huge star. Of course, the mustache, the Ferrari or whatever it was, or the Porsche car and all that kind of stuff. Cool show. I used to watch it with my dad years and years ago. I was only a kid and stuff like that. And that's where Andre got the idea to call Magnum TA, and that's what happened. And it was absolutely brilliant. And off he went. And I mean, he's renowned for a number of feuds. He's renowned for, a lot of stuff that he did, of course, around the US title and stuff like that. The best of 7 with Nikita Koloff stands up to this very day. Absolutely brilliant. Ian's in the comments there. Yeah, the good old Scream Sport. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. You got Memphis. Sunday morning, USWA, Dallas and all. Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant at the time. And I kind of stumbled across it as well. Like, it was weird because I didn't go looking for it. I just put it on one night and I was going, what's this? You know what I mean? And it was pretty cool, So then that was our internet back then. There was no internet. There was no one telling you what was going on. You knew about good guys and bad guys, and that's the way it was. And then it was interesting because there was guys that you would see wrestling on Jim Crockett Promotions, NWA, Arn and Tully Blanchard, a perfect example. And then a month or two later, suddenly they'd be on WWE as the Brain Busters or whatever, or Barry Windham, Lex Luger, all these guys, you know what I mean? Rick Rude. Yeah, I go back to the Midnight Express with Rick Rude and Manny Fernandez and all that kind of stuff was electric at the time, Speaking of mustaches, Rick Rude, of course. But yeah, the show goes on, and then it was kind of like the one thing that Dusty and the Crockett's were really good at was in terms of booking and laying out booking for a number of months, laying out the plan and how they were going to bring people in and all that kind of stuff. And Magnum had reached that point where he was way over with the fans. The men were absolutely mental for him. The women absolutely lapped him up and loved him. And he was really, really over and stuff like that. So he was pinged as going to be the next world heavyweight champion, the guy to go up against Ric Flair and take the belt. And of course, he went out and he bought himself the perks of his success. He bought himself a Porsche 911. And anyone who knows a Porsche 911 knows that it tends to slide a little bit in its back end, let's just say, based on its design. And he was coming home, I think, one night traveling back, obviously from a show or whatever it was, and it was horrific weather, torrential rain and stuff like that. And what happened was, it was where are we talking about now? October 14, 1986, and the car started hydroplaning, and he was obviously traveling at quite a high speed and stuff like that, and it collided with a telephone pole. And you can see the car wreckage was absolutely crazy. He had to be cut out of the car. The top was cut off. The whole back end was wrapped around the pole. The whole thing. How he survived, no one knew. I mean, when this stuff came out and stuff and all, and you seen the car and all, there was no way this guy could survive. And if he did, he was going to be like paralyzed from the neck down, wouldn't be able to do anything, basically, you know. Very, very sad, of course. And this is just, remember, as he's reaching his peak. So he ends up in hospital. And this is like to understand back then wrestling and and wrestling within the community and the state and the areas and all that kind of stuff. When we talk about the territory wrestling and all that kind of stuff, this was absolutely monumental. He was in the hospital. You know, they had to lay on extra people to answer phone calls, all the press and the news. It was all over the telly. It was all in all the publications. There was crowds upon crowds upon crowds gathering outside the hospitals, you know, lighting candles, vigils, flowers, all that kind of stuff. And you know, even to the point you listen to the people on the show talking about how, you know, Ric Flair and the boys, they all obviously chipped in a certain amount of their pay and all to help him out with the medical costs. He was in the hospital for a long, long time, obviously, based on his injuries and stuff like that. But it's interesting when you hear that, like, Flair had to be, because of the heels and the faces and all that stuff, and this is how protective they were of the business at the time, that they had to get a security guard late at night to sneak the Horseman in to visit him to see if he was okay. And I think they said that Flair left the belt with him, the World Heavyweight belt. You can see it's the one with the brown strap, absolutely beautiful, fantastic looking belt. But yeah, they had to sneak the boys in to see him and sneak them back out to keep the good guys and the bad guys and all this kind of thing, you know. But this was a huge accident insofar as how it laid out the groundwork for wrestling and how it was going to move and change, and the effect it had on Jim Crockett Promotions. And David Crockett talks about it, of course, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But Magnum was penciled in. He was going to be an absolutely huge star, to the point where they were talking about him being that kind of Hulk Hogan kind of babyface guy at that kind of level for Crockett and the territories down there and stuff like that. That Vince was making huge headway, obviously, up in New York and stuff like that. They were knocking it out of the park. Hogan at this stage was monstrous. And it went on from there. And it kind of this kind of derailed everything, because what happened is with Dusty and the Crockett's and stuff like that, they didn't really have a plan B in terms of, well, what are we going to do now? The Crockett's thought that Magnum would recover and come back wrestling. That was their thinking. But he didn't. He was back in again. Magnum TA, badass. Yeah, absolutely badass. He was awesome. But yeah, so that's what they thought at the time, and then things kind of changed and stuff like that. And spawning out of that accident, then, of course, we had Nikita, of course, turning babyface, and he formed the Superpowers with Dusty Rhodes at the time. If you remember, they had many feuds with the Horsemen and various other factions and tag teams. No less the Horsemen, of course. But out of that also as well, you had a number of other things going on there as well. What happened was Jimmy Garvin and the brother Ron Jimmy Garvin, Ron Garvin and Jimmy Garvin, they were in a feud with Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express. Of course, Jimmy Garvin had Precious with him. And this is the Jim Cornette who did the fireball into the face to Ron Garvin. And of course, this is where Jimmy Garvin turns babyface, of course, and went in and attacked the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette and stuff like that, turning him babyface. And if you remember, Jimmy Garvin absolutely decorated around all the territories and stuff that, had the curly hair and stuff that you'll remember him from the Freebird type of things and all those kind of things. But he had Precious with him, of course, who was a beautiful lady, his valet. She used to go around with the perfume thing and all from and all, and the glitter would be in the hair and all. If you remember, like, Coming to America, remember Soul Glow? It was like that Soul Glow type of stuff. It was really, really cool. And he'd go around, he'd do the dance, he'd have the glitter gloves and bottoms on him and all that kind of stuff. So he started feuding then with Flair, and got attacked by Flair in a cage match. And the upset of that was that Precious had to go on a date with Ric Flair. And she went on that date with Flair, and I think J.J. Dillon was there as well. And it was Ron Garvin who broke into that date and absolutely pulverized J.J. Dillon and pulverized Ric Flair. Now, if you remember Ron Garvin and Jimmy Garvin, it's so interesting context. These two boys Ron was the shorter hair, blonde, bleach blonde, hands of stone, of course. I always wondered about that hands of stone as well, because I always knew that a closed fist was illegal. So he always hit the closed fist on the opposite side to the referee as well and stuff like that. But he basically, his knockout punch was a punch straight to the forehead, basically, that knocked guys out. So Ronnie Garvin ended up, Hands of Stone ended up in a feud with Flair, culminating in Ron Garvin winning the belt, which again was kind of, I don't know how it all came about and how it all evolved and stuff like that. Mainly out of the feud that Jimmy was having with the Horseman, and Ron came in to kind of balance the books, if you like, and stuff like that. So, but of course, this would have been Magnum who would have been doing this, and Jim Cornette talks about how they had spoke about Starrcade and stuff like that, but it might be too early for it, and they were thinking this would have to be a big event and stuff like that for Magnum TA. So, I think Jim Cornette on his review mentioned that he thinks that it would have been maybe in a kind of a stadium like a Great American Bash, like the way Flair came in with the helicopter. But this would have been Magnum coming in with a load of Hell's Angels guy, because he was the biker guy, the biker jacket. He was the all-American guy, if you like, and stuff like that. And it's great context that Jim comes out with there. And probably Great American Bash would have been the one, because we know that Dusty liked to blow these guys up really big. When you think about Dusty and you think about Barry Windham and the Garvins and the Road Warriors and all these guys, it was all a big deal at the time and stuff like that, you know. But that's how it came along. Then Terry came back, obviously. Couldn't do a whole lot. Did a bit of color commentary and various things like that and all. But it was a shame the way that kind of side of things panned out and stuff like that. But the one thing I do preface on these things is that he didn't pass away. So he lived to tell the story, and that's most unusual in these Dark Side of the Rings episodes, because they're normally pretty tough, because most of the people who are involved in them, or the subject matter, tend to be either dead, passed away, in prison, not being able to get at all that kind of thing, you know. And most of the episodes tend to center around tragedy, murder, abuse on all so many different levels and all that kind of thing. So this was kind of a very different episode in terms of a Dark Side of the Ring. Corvo's in. How are you, my friend? That Magnum TA episode was great. Sad his career was cut short when he was on the up. Yeah, absolutely. I think Vince McMahon did have his eye on Magnum TA at one point. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think in that case, Ian, I think what might have happened there is once he was propelled into that baby face, and he would have been so big and so over and stuff like that. And with Vince trying to spread into the territories and stuff like that, Magnum would have been absolutely perfect to come up there and stuff like that. And again, we had seen it already. I mean, Barry Windham had gone in there, you know, Arn and Tully had headed off at that stage and everything and all. So there was a lot of stuff going on in Crockett Promotions at the time as well. Magnum TA versus Flair for the world title would have been unreal. Yeah, absolutely would have been unreal. Daz is in. Big up, Niall. How are you, Daz? Hope you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying the show. We are doing, of course, folks, a review of Dark Side of the Ring Shattered, the Magnum TA story review. So yeah, then you get a number of interviews here. David Crockett talking about, you know, if Terry Allen had never been in the accident, the future of the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, the sky is the limit. Now, if you know your history about Jim Crockett Promotions, theoretically that could have happened. My guess is he may have headed off, like Ian said. I think WWE would have touted him in eventually, and the draw would have been just too much. But I think when they talk about the sky being the limit, if you know your history about Jim Crockett Promotions and the NWA at that time, a lot of what held them back and a lot of what, you know, led to WCW going up against WWE and the territory system kind of going away was the fact that they couldn't handle the growth that was there in front of them, because they hadn't put in place the structures or the personnel or the expertise to deal with how the wrestling business was evolving at the time. It had blown up so big when you think of WrestleMania 3 and all these things and what WWF was doing, and they were doing huge TV deals, syndication, all that kind of stuff, marketing, merchandise, all this kind of thing, you know, and it was just blown up so big. And I think the biggest downfall for Crockett really and Jim Crockett Promotions was they were trying to think on a big scale, but they were always hesitant to put in what needed to be put in, the structures and the stuff to develop and grow that way, like what Vince did. You know what I mean? Like if you look at WWE now is not five lads sitting around the swimming pool in Connecticut. You know what I mean? It's a very different beast, a very different animal with huge amounts of staff and production and broadcast and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's where Turner came in, and Turner could see, well, okay, I could take this and develop this further because he had the structures already there. So it seemed like a match made in heaven, but history tells us for the time it was, and then it kind of just lost its head. But yeah, that's where I would differ in my opinion to what David Crockett's was. Now, obviously, he was closer, son of Jim Crockett Senior, of course, and Cornette obviously alluded to it in his review as well. He said when David Crockett came on the screen, he says, "I am David Crockett, the son of Jim Crockett Senior," and then it goes straight to a video footage, a vignette, and it's Jim Crockett Jr., which is David's brother, not his dad, even though the narrative was that I'm Jim Crockett Senior's son, and he goes to his other brother. So it was a little bit kind of a mismatch there, but nothing major, just a small thing, you know. Carver's in. I think Magnum TA could be an ambassador for AEW or in a creative role. His knowledge is amazing. Yeah, absolutely. He is still so much to offer the business. We did a great interview with him. It was an absolute pleasure doing it with him and stuff like that. For me, I don't know about you guys, but I was just teleported back to my childhood again, and I was kind of like dare I say, a little mark on the screen about these kind of things and stuff like that. I didn't want it to be too structured because I did really want to enjoy it as a throwback, but at the same time, I was sensitive about how the story had gone and stuff like that, you know, and you always have to be careful when you're looking back at those things. Acer's in, what a fantastic wrestler, yeah, absolutely fantastic wrestler. And it's mad to think when you think about his, you know, like in the space of 4 to 5 years, he was propelled into stardom. You know what I mean? You hear people talking about paying their dues and all that kind of stuff. He was recognised and very quickly he was pushed into that situation and stuff like that. The day Magnum TA got injured, Crockett Promotions was doomed. They had massive stock on Magnum. Yeah, absolutely. And it was more, I think, Corvo as well, they just didn't have any other plan because they didn't expect this to happen, which is kind of understandable as well. And I mean, you think about it even these days, many times do we hear of Vince changing the script on Raw last minute within a couple of hours of going on air and all that kind of stuff. But this, I know with Crockett Promotions, they laid out things. They were Dusty was very, very good and very, very clever in the way. He was very astute in the way he laid out his booking and the path to certain things, to the point where he was so meticulous in the way he planned it, it could never fail, you know. And then all of a sudden this drops into your lap and you're going, okay, what are we going to do now? And he was hustling. There was Nikita, the superpowers. Obviously, this whole Russia-US narrative was huge at the time and stuff like that. So for Dusty and Nikita to come together, be a team, the whole superpowers thing was, you know, you were talking Reagan, Gorbachev at the time and stuff like that. So very clever again from Dusty and stuff like that. Is Magnum TA Tessa Blanchard's stepfather? He is indeed, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the funny thing, Corvo, as well. It didn't get into talking about that whole situation there with Tully's ex-wife and stuff like that and all. That was kind of just smooth it over. Probably wasn't important to the episode. Probably come up in another Dark Side episode. Who knows? Aces, his delivery with Flair and Dusty Rhodes was brilliant and fantastic wrestling. Absolutely, yeah, looked the part and all. Yeah, Magnum TA and the Horseman would have been great. Yeah, I don't know. He was very baby faced as well, wasn't he? And at a time where, when you think about the way the Horsemen had gone, you know what I mean? It was kind of like, you know, they had kind of gone through everyone. There wasn't a whole lot left for them to do and stuff like that. So, you know, they found themselves doing different matches like the War Game stuff against, you know, the Road Warriors, Dusty and Nikita or whatever it was and all, you know. Then they were bringing in Luger. Then they brought in Barry Windham and stuff like that. And, you know, it was just then one came out, one stepped in, then they both came out and they tagged and went up against them and stuff like that. So they were really running out of guys for the Horsemen to, you know, go up against that they hadn't done already and stuff like that. And if you remember at the time, there wasn't a huge amount coming through either as well. It was always circling around the same kind of, they didn't have a monstrous roster. You know, certainly not a monstrous roster of baby faces anyway, that's for sure, you know. You got to remember at the time, if you remember your history, the likes of Jimmy Garvin and all at the time was a heel, you know, and it's only when they changed him with the Ron Garvin stuff and all. I remember it well, like it was yesterday. I can see myself sitting on the floor watching it on telly, you know. Yeah, but interesting, interesting there from Corvo. Yeah, Magnum TA and the Horseman would have been great. Yeah, I'd be more inclined to think Magnum TA going up against the Horseman, and if he had got the belt off Flair and that rivalry keeping going, and of course Dusty getting involved, would Nikita have stayed heel? If it hadn't happened, my thinking is probably so, based on the political climate out there and stuff like that. And various other things probably would have happened. But I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure whether Jim Crockett and that whole territory down there, it would have blown up pretty big already. It was pretty big already, remember. But as Jimmy said on his review and stuff like that, once the likes of Barry Windham had gone off and guys like that, and Aaron and Tully and stuff like that, they were really struggling to get the numbers at times as well, you know. So, but it's certainly it's a brilliant episode, and the one thing I do like about the Dark Side of the episodes, if you can find something that you like about them not being torturous going through them. Remember, we've had episodes here basically on pedophilia and all sorts of stuff. You know, it's some of them are horrific to get through and stuff like that. Really, really hard to watch. Corvo, do you think if Magnum went to WWE would have been pushed? I think he would have been pushed at the time, because I think if you go back to WWE at the time, a lot of the baby faces that you had in there were great characters and great little wrestlers and all that kind of stuff. We got Coco with the bird and stuff like that and all. But the one thing that WWE had was they were brilliant with heels. They'd always lots of heels, you know. Honky was in there, the Heart Foundation were in there. You know, you had Butch Reed. You know, you had so many good guys in there. I think Don Morocco at the time had turned heel at the time as well. He was tagging. Bob Orton was in there. All heels. So so many heels at the time, you know. And then you had Hogan and stuff like that, you know. And then you were starting to see the emergence of the Heenan stable and all that kind of stuff. All heels. Haku was in there. Hardy Race. All these guys. You know, the one kind of baby faces that stuck out for me, obviously Rick Martel, the Can-Am Connection were in there at the time, went on to be Strikeforce, of course, with the great Tito Santana. Then you had Ricky Steamboat, of course, who was the ultimate baby face in there, chasing down Macho Man for so long. And then, of course, getting injured and having to, after that fantastic win at WrestleMania 3, surrendering the IC belt, then losing it to Honky Tonk Man, and, of course, went on. History then laid its way, of course, in the IC belt, which Gunther now is trying to kind of rewrite. But they weren't drenched in baby faces, you know. And I think if Magnum had went in, I don't think. I mean, obviously, clearly, no one reaches Hogan level in terms of baby faceness at that time in the business and stuff like that. But I think if he had went in, I think he would have been very important to them as that baby face. He could have really easily slotted in and had a great program there with Macho Man. He could have had a great program in there with DiBiase, you know, and a number of guys like that and stuff, you know, as that maybe, I won't say second tier, but, you know, slightly tiered down babyface and stuff like that would have been really, really good. And then, of course, if you know your history with WCW, and then, of course, Hogan moved off and all that kind of stuff, and, you know, maybe he could have built him up so much that he would have been the babyface in the company then, who knows. And it's something that'd be nice to ask and stuff like that. I know Ian has an episode. He reached out to him for another episode, and he's going to do one with him. So it'll be interesting to see, guys, if you catch that episode on Dynamo's Dozen, make sure you get in to ask, would he have moved on eventually, or would he have slid into WCW? We know that there was so much back and forth with the talent and all that kind of stuff, so would have been interesting. He would have been jobbed around because of his popularity in the NWA. I don't think that's the case, Ian. I don't think he would have been jobbed around. No, not at all. That wouldn't have been my thinking on it at all. I think if you go in there and you carry that weight that's in there, and you carry that kind of fandom that's in there, and of course, you know, WWF was spreading down into the territories at this stage and on its path to take over the world, basically, and stuff like that. They needed guys like this, badly needed guys like this, you know. So I don't think that would be the case. I think he wasn't given the World Heavyweight because Dusty Rhodes went off to WWF, so Jim Crockett stuck with Flair because his money man who people wanted to see. Well, no, he wasn't given the World Heavyweight Championship. Are we talking about Magnum here? Magnum wasn't given the World Heavyweight Championship because of the accident. Basically, he was in line to get the belt. There was no doubt he was going to get the belt. It was just the timing of it, and the accident paved way to it. It was nothing to do with if we're talking about the same guy now. But let me know, Acers. Corvo, Vince would have had Magnum in the mid card, I think, because Vince buried some people he didn't create. Yeah, but remember back then as well, not dissimilar to nowadays either. If you think about that mid card that's in there, that mid card at the time was like Macho Man, Steamboat, Honky Tonk. There was a lot of really, really good talent in that mid card. And if you go back and you look at WrestleMania 3, apart from Hogan and Andre, your abiding memory of 3 is Savage and Steamboat and stuff like that. Well, that was your mid card level that was outdoing your top tier guys at the time. And I think Magnum would have been more than capable of doing that. There was nothing wrong. The mid card back then didn't necessarily, there was more of a structure through it. If you were in the mid card back then and you were getting booked well and you were doing the part and you looked the part, and I mean, you got to remember with Magnum as well, he was that all American guy. He was kind of like, he was very, very marketable and stuff like that and all. And, not dissimilar to the Road Warriors. They could have had him coming out on a bike way before Taker ever came out on a bike and was the American badass and all that kind of stuff. So he could have worked out and he could have been a big, big star, Gimmicks plus storytelling equals WWF, WWE. Corvo, I could be wrong. Vince did let Flair win the Rumble. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you can't. I think this whole premise or thinking that, like, because you came from a different territory or because you came from a different place, that it was like a kind of a punishment and stuff like that, and you were going to be held back down there. I think if you're good enough and if you're marketable enough and if you have the talent and stuff like that, you will rise to the top and you will do well. I mean, Kerry Von Erich came in there from Texas as the Texas Tornado and did really, really well. And of course, he had the accident and stuff that no one knew about, and that sort of stumbled a little bit. But does anyone think that Kerry Von Erich wouldn't have been a big star? And at times was a big star. And he came in from Texas. You got to remember, like, these guys are coming in with pedigree as well. You know what I mean? These guys aren't rocking in the door as blow-in slouches. We're not talking about like jobbers here coming in the door. These guys are coming in with high-level pedigree from different territories and stuff like that. Lawler came in, did really, really well from Memphis. So he was able to pick. And this is kind of, we spoke about this on the podcast a few weeks ago as well. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about wrestling going back similar to that territory kind of system, but on a more global stage now. We're talking about, shows down in Australia and stuff like that with Rhea Ripley and all that stuff. We just did the Night of Champions over there with people from that region and all being very highlighted on the card and stuff like that. Ali had the match with Gunther and stuff like that. They knocked it out of the park with the show. We know Money in the Bank is coming up now. Finn Balor versus Seth Rollins. You're looking at a Money in the Bank men's card. We're going to be talking about it tomorrow night and all, where all the participations haven't won a Money in the Bank and haven't been a champion. So that's going to be interesting to see who gets propelled out of that, and various other things going on. So I don't think I would devalue that in any way. I think if you're talented enough and you go in there and you're, Lex Luger went into WWE and stuff like that. It's not like they didn't back him. It's not like they didn't, put the work in and stuff like that. Sometimes it hits the note and sometimes it doesn't. So for me, I'm not too sure about that, but I think you're right, Corvo. Yeah, look at Flair. Acers, I think he and Honky Tonk Man in the Continental Championship feud would have been fantastic. Yeah, that would have been really fantastic. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, who else would you feud in there? Him and Macho would have been a great feud. Him and Jake would have been a great feud. Him and Piper would have been a great feud. It's amazing when you talk about these guys who are going to propel themselves as huge baby faces, and you think like you can create any amount of matchups for baby faces going into WWF at that stage because it's such a plethora of heels. It was so easy. Butch Reed was in there. I'm not sure, was Bossman in there at that stage? Akeem, One Man Gang. There's so many guys in there and stuff like that. Who knows? There's so many of them. But then you think, when you think about it, if I give you a heel and I say, right, there's a heel, throw it in there. Okay, your first part of call is obviously Hogan, but you're never going to be hitting that level straight away. So you have to think about it. If I you give me a heel and put a heel in there and go, right, who are you going to put him in a storyline with? You have to think about it. You know what I mean? You've Tito Santana, Coco Beware, you know, whatever formation of the Bulldogs. Rick Martel obviously was in there. Tom Zink, I think, had headed off at that stage. They were in there as the Can-Am Connection. Tom Zink headed off. The WCW had a horrible attitude and stuff like that. Tito slotted in as Rick's partner for Strike Force. You know, it's a tough one to call. Magnum and Warrior. That would have been an extremely interesting one. Extremely interesting one. That's an interesting one, actually, Corvo, that you bring that one up. If Magnum had gone in, would Magnum have been big enough to be propelled into that situation? And could we have potentially seen down the line Magnum versus Hogan at Mania 6 or something like that? Who knows? You know what I mean? It's mad. The Warrior was a lunatic. A huge fan of the Warrior. I am, of course. Rest in peace. Absolutely loved him. Have a bunch of merchandise up there. Ultimate Warrior. I always loved the Ultimate Warrior and the Road Warriors and all those kind of guys. Demolition, Powers of Pain and stuff like that. But I suppose getting back to the episode, Bad News Brown. There you go. Bad News Brown. Bad News Brown and Haku, the ultimate heels. Ultimate heels. Had the pleasure of meeting Haku actually at WrestleMania 24. Absolute gentleman. His reputation is out there that most people that know and stuff like that. But when I met him, he's an absolute gem. And I met him in the crowd. I was sitting right beside him. Bought the tickets for WrestleMania 24 on Ticketmaster. Sit down, and who's beside me? Haku. What more would you want and stuff like that? Carvo in with a good shout, yeah, absolute good shout. So that's, yeah, you could name as many heels as you want that Magnum could have went in and feuded with. But when you think about baby faces going in and stuff like that, it's so much more difficult to slot in when you think about probably the stranglehold that Hogan had at that time in the company and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of just a reflection on Dark Side of the Ring. Magnum shattered the Magnum TA story. As I said, Ian is going to have him back on Dynamo's dozen soon, so keep an eye out for that episode. I'm sure Ian will promote it out on his channel and stuff like that. Yeah, it was just it's probably on reflection a case of, you know, what might have been and stuff like that, and it would have been interesting to see how it did shape the territory going forward on Jim Crockett Promotions, what effect it may have had when Turner came knocking and stuff like that, and also would have been really, really interesting. Carver's back in. I'm glad Jake is doing well. He's looked good in the doc. Yeah, he does. He looks great, Jake, actually. I hope he keeps it up. And I know he's been doing some work with AEW and stuff like that as well. And I met him a few times. He's an absolute gent as well, Jake the Snake Roberts. So happy that I got to meet him. And it's a big thing I do when I go to WrestleMania. WrestleMania week for me. I say to people all the time, the WrestleCons that I go to and the pre-parties and the meetups and all that kind of stuff are as important to me as WrestleMania itself. And I'm just glad I got to meet guys like the Powers of Pain and Kevin Sullivan and Akeem and Slick and all these guys, Demolition and stuff like that. These are all the guys that shaped my childhood. And I do have regrets about some of them I didn't get to meet, that I would have loved to meet and stuff like that, but I just didn't. But certainly, yeah, always great. You keep those memories with you and stuff like that. I met the Warlord and the Barbarian and all the Powers of Pain, and Barbarian, absolute gentleman, the Warlord, absolute gentleman, Demolition gentleman. Couldn't believe that guy from Ireland would travel all the way to the US to meet these guys who had such a profound part on his childhood back in the day and stuff like that. It was absolutely fabulous to meet them. Having Ric Flair come to WWF with the NWA World Title, calling himself the real World Heavyweight Champion, then going on to win the WWF World Title in the Royal Rumble 92 was a shot against WCW. Absolutely, one of many shots that they did against WCW, and I'm sure if Magnum didn't move potentially at the time of the takeover, I wonder who would he have moved during that sort of WCW wars that all unfolded and stuff like that. Would he have been a pivotal part of it? I'm sure Magnum TA as well. He would have been such a luxury for creative and for booking and stuff like that. So easy to book, so talented. His promos were fantastic. There was great emotion in there as well, and it really suited that grit of the territories on Jim Crockett Promotions and stuff like that as well. So I'm sure from a creative booking point of view, you know, Mr. Consistent all the time, always performed in a really consistent way and stuff like that. Storytelling at times was really, really good as well. So yeah, it would have been a dream for creative in WWF. Folks, that's it. What can I say more about Shattered Magnum TA? If you haven't seen it, go and take a look at it. It's dare I say, it's a great story. It's a sad story. There's a little bit of tragedy in it, but the good that comes out is the fact that Magnum is still alive. He didn't die in the crash. He was able to move on and still work in the business and have a successful business career as well, and is now heavily involved in wrestling again in terms of legends and memorabilia and all these WrestleCons and all these various things and stuff like that. Like I said, check out the episode we did with Ian as well. He was an absolute gent, and we deep dived into the best of 7 with Nikita Koloff and all at the time and stuff like that. But it was a special time in wrestling, especially for me. I lived and breathed it. It was every bit of my childhood, as they say. Ian, really, really appreciate that, and thanks for your comments. Thanks everyone for the comments as well. Hope you're enjoying these reviews and stuff like that. Hope I'm doing them justice as well. These were big guys in my childhood and stuff like that. So I always like to do it justice. I have to say, this was one of the easier episodes because there isn't where there was an accident and there was sadness and it changed the direction of wrestling. It wasn't a massive tragedy, if you like, and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely. Acer's in with a comment as well. Shame that Vince McMahon didn't put World Heavyweight Championship on the line in '91 before Flair won the WWF title in the Rumble match. Was dying to see Piper versus Flair for the World Heavyweight Championship. Yeah, 100% agree with that, Acer's. 100% agree. Yeah. Piper and all, and even last week I was so emotional with the Iron Sheik one as well, you know, and that video with Cyndi Lauper, and you see Piper getting out and classy Freddie Blassie and all the guys, and just throws you back to that time. They were great times and all, you know, the things that we get upset about these days and we worry about and people get all annoyed about and all and stuff like that, you know, sometimes it boggles my mind, you know. Listen, folks, have a great evening. Don't forget, tomorrow night I will be back. I think it's either 8:30 or 9 o'clock. We're going to be looking at Money in the Bank. We're going to be looking at AEW Collision. We're going to be talking about all the latest wrestling news. And we're also going to be dropping some notable birthdays and some history. We're going to be doing all that tomorrow night for about an hour. Then Thursday, I'm back on with Darren. We're going to be discussing treble versus treble. And we're also going to be talking about the fixture list for the top 6. And we're also going to be talking about transfer news as well. Don't forget to check out the Morning Brew. Most mornings I'm doing that as well. Dropping transfer news and latest football news to give my thoughts on that. You can also give your thoughts on that as well. There could be, glad to mention this, I haven't heard from the volcano himself. Do Kyle watch video tomorrow? Yeah, Kyle is supposed to be dropping into me in the shop tomorrow. I hope he does. And we said we were going to do a bit of lunch. And what we might do is we might even drop a little video over lunch where the two of us just chat crap about football while we're having a bit of food, bit of crack and stuff like that. So we'll see if he's up for that. If he is, it'll be a bit of crack. And I'll give him a copy for his channel as well. And we'll upload that. And then, as I said, Thursday, I'm on your screens with Darren for a kind of just a different casual flavour type of thing. If you want to jump in the chat, it's like a kind of a Q&A as well. You can ask us anything you want about football. We never shy away from any of the questions. And then Friday, as far as I know, I'm on Henry Ray Baker's channel. He's going to be interviewing me. He's starting an interview series, chatting to different football fans and stuff like that. And I have the distinct pleasure of being the first one. So there you go. And Aces with his last one, Arteta out. Let's see what happens there. Absolutely. As I said, folks, really appreciate you subbing on the channel. The subs are growing on a daily basis now. And the likes, and hit the bell notification. I will be back tomorrow at least once, if not twice. As always, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification if you haven't done it already, and drop a like on the video. Share the content as well if you want. And if you don't want to be looking at our ugly mugs, you get us out there now. We're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music for the audio shows. And have a great evening. We'll chat again tomorrow.